You know, so far this 21st century, I think that so many of us anticipated as being the entrance into the brave new world, it's really presented us with a lot of big downers, a lot of challenges. And then, of course, an event like today comes along, or you meet someone very much like the presenters and speakers that we've met today, and you're struck by the probable or possible solutions that they offer us for our challenges. They certainly have their youth and they have their youthful outlooks. And then there are people like our next presenter, ShawnAchor. What drives one out of every 7 undergraduates at Harvard to take the course that he developed there? Positive psychology. I guess they need it at Harvard. Ideology. The science of peak potential. We are all getting the course today tuition free, right now, from ShawnAchor.
Good afternoon. When I was 7 years old and my sister was just 5, we were playing on top of my bunk bed, and it was my G.I. Joes against my sister's My Little Ponies. And at one point, my sister got really excited, and she leaned backwards, and all of a sudden, she fell off the bed and crashed onto the floor, landing painfully on her hands and knees. Now, I'd been charged by my parents to make sure that my sister and I played quietly and safely, for they were just settling down for a long winter's nap. And I saw this cry of pain and injustice welling up in my sister and about to erupt. And I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do. I said, Amy, wait. Did you see how you landed? No human lands like that. You're a unicorn. Now, I must be a Picasso because I peaked as a 7-year-old. I cheated because I knew that there was nothing my sister wanted more than for the world to realize that she was, in fact, a unicorn. And you could see on her face, her brain struggling, conflicted between devoting resources to feeling the pain and suffering and injustice she had just experienced and contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out. And my sister had a smile come across her face, and she climbed back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. Now, what my sister and I had stumbled upon at the age of 7 and 5 was something that was at the vanguard of a scientific revolution 2 decades later. We're learning that the brain is a single processor, and it has to devote its resources to only certain parts and certain things at a time. As a result, our brains get to choose between the wail of injustice and suffering, or choosing to view the world through the eyes and mindset of a unicorn. In this case, mindset and happiness are a choice, a conscious choice that are improved and made easier by training which has been researched over the past 2 decades to find absolutely extraordinary ideas. And we're finding that our mindset and the way that we surround ourselves with experiences absolutely shapes the experience of happiness and our pursuit of potential. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here because that's exactly what you've chosen to do. By signing up for the UP experience, you've decided to reject the previous notions, the previous patterns of the world in order to transform yourself through the renewing of your mind. And for me, it's such an honor to be a small part of that today. And an honor to be back here in Texas. I'm from Waco, Texas originally. I grew up my whole life in Waco for 18 years until one of my friends dared me to apply to Harvard, and I did, and to my shock and to everyone else's shock. When I got in, I have not left yet, because I'm afraid if I do, they won't let me back in. So I've been at Harvard and seen extraordinary things over the past 12 years that I've been there, and loved every minute of it. But when my friends come up from Texas, up from Waco, to come see Harvard, they oftentimes say that it's a little bit like visiting Harry at Hogwarts from Harry Potter. This is the freshman dining hall at Harvard. This is where all the freshmen get to eat their meals. This is Hogwarts. The only thing missing are the owls. And when my friends see this dining hall and they see all these amazing resources and all the opportunities facing these students, they say, Shawn, why would you study happiness at Harvard? Seems like Harvard is a different type of population, and what could a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Now, for the past 12 years, I've lived and researched and taught at Harvard, and I still find it to be a magical place. But even as J.K. Rowling pointed out to us, the existence of magic does not preclude the existence of suffering. In a Harvard Crimson poll, 80% of Harvard students, 80%, experience work-debilitating depression at some point during their 4 years at Harvard. 4 out of the 5 experience depression while they're there. Now, this is based on the expectations that are placed upon them both on the inside and out, and this is true for students all across the nation. But imagine for a moment, if you will, students who, some of them, ever since they were in their crib and they were put into little Harvard onesies and maybe a little Yale hat in case something terrible happened. And ever since they were in special pre-K school, they were at the top 1% of their class of being able to point out the primary colors. And then they were the top 1% all the way through high school, and then they walk into this freshman dining hall. They walk in, and suddenly, to their horror, 50% of them are now below average. 99% of them will not graduate in the top 1%. And as a result, there's an identity shift that must occur. And these people struggle with it. And they're feeling pressure on the inside and from the outside. I know one student whose parents, ever since he was little, would take the placemats he would draw on at Denny's or his handwriting exercise and keep them because these will be in a museum someday. That was a lot of pressure on me. That was a lot. Now, these students are brilliant. They are. Every day I'm blown away by them. But when it comes to happiness, they're quite dumb. They're dumb because one of the things that we realize about happiness, I'd say they're not dumb, they're just uneducated. One of the things we've started to realize in positive psychology research is that how important relationships and social bonds are to our happiness. We all know that. Those are the things that provide us the most joy. But when you look at these Harvard students, and one of the largest experiments that's ever been done at Harvard, I found that the average number of romantic relationships that they experience during their 4 years of college is less than 1. The average number of sexual partners during this period is between 0 and 0.5. I don't even know what 0.5 sexual partners is. Now, I'm not making fun of them. I'm still single, and I'm still dragging these numbers down. But it's amazing that these absolutely brilliant students, 24% of them, are unaware if they are currently involved in a romantic relationship. In the midst of all this depression and lack of social bonds and perhaps the lack of love, again, I ask the question, why study happiness at Harvard? In 2006, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar came up to me and asked me if I'd be the head teaching fellow for a class called Positive Psychology. We designed this together and worked on it, and we thought that there might be 100 students that would decide to take a hit on their transcript, to not take advanced economic theory, but rather to take a class on happiness. When we walked into the classroom on the very first day, nearly 1,000 students sat waiting for us. 1 out of 7 Harvard students was waiting for us, and they were waiting because they were hungry. They were hungry because they wanted to focus upon a happiness that was not off in the future, but in the present. They were starving because despite all these external advantages we just described, they still felt unfulfilled. Now, if you've already guessed, this is not only the story of Harvard, but a story of the world in the 21st century. Depression rates in the United States are 10 times higher now than they were during the Great Depression. Malcolm Gladwell mentioned earlier how we've been pushing kids to a younger and younger age to be productive, and boy, they certainly are. We're finding that the beginning mean age of depression is 14 and a half years old, as opposed to the measly 29 and a half from 1960. Depression rates are increasing. We're experiencing what scientists are calling a progress paradox. A progress paradox is, despite all our advances, the inventions of iPhones and iPods and medical technology and advances in education, we're becoming less happy. We're becoming more depressed. We've evolved as humans to become stronger and taller and smarter and more productive, but not happier. Why? Positive psychology is a movement in academia that began about a decade ago, but is based upon research that we've been having for a very long time. But we're now starting based upon brain scans and being able to have some advances in psychology to learn so much more. But it's based upon this principle. Instead of studying what's merely the average or below average, positive psychology rather seeks to study what is above average, to find out what is working instead of what is not working. We need to study the people that are extremely healthy as opposed to only studying those that are unhealthy. In medical school, if you know people that have been to medical school or you know people that are now, there's something called the medical school syndrome. Medical school syndrome is where, as you're reading through all the list of symptoms, you suddenly realize, I have all of these. My brother-in-law called me from medical school and he said, Shawn, I have leprosy. And I had no idea how to console him because he had just gotten over menopause. We are what we study. And currently there's a 21-to-1 negative to positive ratio in terms of the way we study psychology. We know a lot about how to be unhealthy and to be sick. We know very little about how to be happy and to thrive. That was until positive psychology, which instead decides to look at not the average or the main pattern, but as you can see in the top right graph there, this is just a really brief statistics introduction for positive psychology, that you can see that there's this one red dot that doesn't fit. Now, students that are just learning about statistics and psychology are taught in the statistical package, you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, how to remove that outlier. It doesn't fit the pattern. And chances are it could be a measurement error. So you learn to get that out of the way so you can make sure you can publish, because you've got a great line going there otherwise. But my question is this, and positive psychology asks this. It says, what if that's not a measurement error? What if that is a Michael Jordan, or a Mother Teresa, or a Martin Luther King Jr., or a Roger Bannister? I don't want to delete positive outliers. I want to learn from them. I want to learn from them how they got up so high for whatever dimension it is, whether it's resiliency, happiness, energy, strength, how long they live, how many people that they feel like that they can care for, humor levels, whatever it is, we want to learn from them. And then we'll take those ideas, glean those ideas, and then move the average up. That is positive psychology in a nutshell. And I would say positive psychology, put simply, is merely the study of human potential. Modern society has put the cart before the horse. In the past, we thought that if you worked hard and were successful, then you would be happy. That's what all these Harvard students are taught. That's what we teach our children. That's what we teach. That's part of values and ethics. Work hard and you'll be happy in the future. Turns out we've gotten the order wrong all along. Turns out if you're happy before doing an activity, if you're positive before doing the task, you increase your successfulness at completing that task by up to 50%. So in research on this, they took 4-year-olds and they had them do block shape experiments. You probably don't call, if you have kids, you probably just call them playing with blocks. I can't wait to have kids. I need somebody to experiment on. In this, they took these 4-year-olds and they had them put together blocks as fast as possible and gave them neutral instructions about that. But then they had another group, a different group, that they gave the same neutral instructions, but before they did the task, they said, think of your happiest memory. Now, they probably said something like, I had Jell-O for lunch. That was my happiest memory ever. And you can hear the parents in the background going, no, your 3rd birthday was your best memory. That took forever. As long as it makes them happy, what we find is that their happiness level is that they're primed to be happy before doing a task. Their success rate and their speed at doing the task increases by up to 50%. Now, this is remarkable. This means that perhaps by infancy, but at least by the age of 4, our brains are hardwired to perform at optimal levels, not in neutral, but at happy. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, I'm much more complex than a 4-year-old. Probably that's not true. But let's take it if you are. Let's look at a group that's very complex and cynical. Take a group of doctors. And you take doctors, you prime one group to be happy, one group to be neutral, and you give another group a scientific journal to read before making medical diagnoses. Then you have them make these medical diagnoses as fast as you can. And what we find is that the group that's primed to be happy versus the group that was both neutral and the one that was primed to be thinking about science outperformed them by the exact same percentage. We saw a 50% faster rate of correct diagnosis that were occurring and a 3 times greater increase of the intellectual flexibility that was occurring. And they were not primed by thinking of your happiest memory or giving them a complex philosophical treatise on happiness. No, candy. We gave them candy, and they weren't even allowed to eat it because blood sugar might mess up our results. If I gave you 15 different intelligence tests and prime you to be happy beforehand, you significantly perform better on all 15 of those intelligence tests. You actually perform more intelligently when you're primed to be positive beforehand. Now, if you think about this, this changes everything. It changes the way that we studied, right? Where we would go in cramming and stressed about an exam before we took the test. We would have been much more successful and accurate on the test if we had actually spent those minutes making a friend or telling a joke. In the same way, true in the business world. If we send out neutral instructions to our employees where we tell them to do a task through an email or a memo, without priming them first to be positive, we are handicapping them in terms of their productivity and successfulness rates by up to 50%. That changes a lot. Oh, that picture? That was if you're curious about what love looks like for a college male student, that's love in a brain scan. I just think that's interesting. If you have them think about sex, the rest of it lights up. I love this study. This is one of my favorite studies. It's called the Nun Study from 1932. Nuns are great because they wear the same clothes, they eat the same food, they live in the same place. You don't have to pay them very much. But they're great. So what we did is we took these nuns and we had them write in a journal for 3 weeks, and based just upon their journal, we put them into categories, quartiles of happiness, happiest to the least happy, then watch them over time. By age 85, the happiest quartile, 90% of them were alive at 85, based just upon these journals. 70% of the unhappiest quartile had passed away by the same age. That's a remarkable split, and shows how happiness over time builds up within our system to cause changes in our immune system, but also in our longevity. Even in the business world, we're seeing that Sandra Lubomirsky came up with all of the different statistics of how happiness affects somebody in the workplace, and found that individuals are primed to be happy before doing tasks in the workplace, and positive companies these individuals are better at securing jobs, better at keeping jobs, superior productivity, greater performance, more resiliency, less burnout, less turnover, and greater sales. Partly because they're perceived as more attractive, they're perceived as more trustworthy, and they're perceived as more persuasive as a result of that. It's a remarkably unfair advantage to those who go in positive to an event as opposed to neutral or depressed or stressed. Now, this is bad news, however. This is bad news if you believe, however, that happiness cannot change and that you cannot change. However, we found that there's actually extraordinary ways that we actually can change. Our brains are much more malleable than we thought just 10 years ago, when I would have told you that your brain cannot change after adolescence. We found that that's not true at all. And there's some very specific ways you can increase your happiness that we've researched. You can change your baseline. Positive psychology is not about being happy all the time. It's about raising the baseline that you're fluctuating around. Writing 5 things you're grateful for every morning. Just doing this simple 30-second intervention changes your happiness over the next 24 hours, and if you do it for 21 days straight, affects your happiness over the next course of the next 6 months. The reason is your brain is actually devoting more resources to being able to look for good things in your life as opposed to stresses and hassles, which is where it steals its resources from. You get better at navigating your life by doing a 30-second intervention in the morning. Journaling, if you write for 3 minutes about a positive experience once a day, every day for 30 days, you see a 50% drop in doctor visits, according to researchers like Penny Baker. You're found to be more social and your immune system improves. Simplifying versus multitasking, you are happier if you do more things by doing one thing at a time. iPods should absolutely multitask. Humans were not created to do so. We find that it increases our stress level, and stress eats away at every organ in our body. Utilizing your strengths. Find out where your strengths are in your life. Find out where your value is. And individuals that report that they use their strengths in their everyday life find that they have the highest levels of energy, highest levels of productivity, and the highest levels of success of whatever they want to achieve. And that has a ripple effect to their weaker areas. So don't focus just upon your weak areas. Exercise, you've heard this already today, but exercise has been found to be equally as powerful an antidepressant as antidepressants. That in and of itself is a remarkable fact. And meditation, just watching your breath go in and out, changes the way your brain structures itself and changes the electrical impulses in your brain, increasing gamma waves in your brain, which are related to insight and that eureka experience of aha. This is done by watching your breath. You're breathing anyway. You might as well watch it. So why is this so difficult? Let me conclude by saying this. I think it's too difficult for two reasons. I think one, because there's an activation energy that's necessary for us to be able to do these things. Common sense is not common action. Activation energy is the initial investment of energy necessary to accomplish a task. I wanted to play guitar more. I found that 20 seconds taking it out of the closet, out of the case, was preventing me from playing guitar. I changed that 20 seconds, put the guitar in the middle of the room, and suddenly I played 28 out of the next 30 days. 20 seconds was a mental impediment to me actually achieving my happiness and my productivity. So find out what your 20 seconds are and decrease the activation necessary to do the things you want. The last thing is some people think that we should feel guilty about feeling happy when there's so many sad things that are going on in the world. But I say because of things like mirror neurons in our brain, which show that we're actually hardwired to feel empathy towards other people and that our smiles spread just as depression and frowns spread, it makes it so important for us to actually choose positivity. In that sense, in good times, happiness is a luxury. But in times of pain and suffering, of depression and recession, happiness is a necessity. And if this room is any indication, I think we're about to see a positive evolution tip within our society with all these different things rippling out to other people. Thank you for your time.